can I just say that I feel like an absolute Disney princess in this getup? Like, who am I? And I bought this dress for this one particular reason. And you know what? We're living the dream, having a great time. Hey guys, I'm Sabrina, and today I'm going to be doing a wrap up. And this is gonna be a wrap up for April, May, June, July, August, September, and a little bit of October. So 7 months. And you know what? I didn't really read a lot, so it might seem like a lot, but it's not really a lot. So just to kind of describe what this video is going to be like, I will separate these books by genres just so that it's a little bit easier, and I might give a little thought here and there about certain books, maybe all of these books, who really fucking knows. That's what this is, and let's just get into it. So the first genre that I'm going to do is literary fiction, and the first book that I read in this genre was Anil Goes by Michael Ondaatje. I had to read this for school, and honestly, pleasantly surprised. We all know that required reading is never a fun thing for a lot of people, but I really enjoyed this one. There are trigger warnings for this book, so I will leave them down in the description box below, as well as trigger warnings for other books on this list. This book follows our main character Anil, and she's I think anthropologist, and she's invited to go back to her home country, Sri Lanka, to be part of this investigation, and a lot of political things happen, and I really liked this book. There were some parts in the middle where it kind of got boring, but overall I really liked it. I ended up crying at the end of this book because it is entirely heartbreaking. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book in this genre that I read was Sula by Toni Morrison. This was a required read for me back in my sophomore year, but then I decided to reread it again because I loved it the first time when I read it, and I just thought, why not pick it up? Because I had bought a copy of the book for myself earlier in the year. It was equally as great as the first time I read it. It's so, I don't know, this book just like makes me feel so many different emotions. And the thing that I love about this book is that it's a short book, but it covers the life of two protagonists from their childhood all the way until the death of one of the characters. And it's just like amazing that like you never feel like there's something missing within this book, because you are spanning an entire lifetime, and I just really loved it. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. The last book in this genre is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I only picked up this book because I watched the Hulu/BBC series Normal People, and that is my favorite thing in the entire world now. Like, it's my comfort show, you know? And so I decided to pick this up because I've heard that a lot of people really liked it. Even the actors in the show said that they really loved it, and so I was like, you know what? Let's see if I too will love it, and I did not love it. If you don't know what this story is about, this story follows our two main characters, Marianne and Connell, and basically their whole relationship starting from high school all the way up until they're adults. And I don't know why, but in this book it was really boring and bland, but in the show it's so interesting, and I don't know like why there's a difference. But yeah, I gave this book like a 2 out of 5 stars, maybe like a 2.5, I don't know. The only thing that I really liked about this book was that it gave me context for some certain scenes in the series, the TV series. The next genre that we're gonna go into is fantasy. The first books on this list are An Ember in the Ashes, A Torch Against the Night, and A Reaper at the Gates by Sabaa Tahir. These are my absolute favorite fantasy books and the fantasy series, really. It was my 3rd time rereading those, and I just keep loving it more every time I reread them. They are so great, and these books were the first young adult fantasy books that I ever read, and the fact that I read them when I was like 15, and like 4 years later I'm still in love with it. You guys just have to read it. It's amazing. I love these characters. I love the complexity within this world, within its antagonist and protagonist. It follows 3 perspectives, and they are in certain positions of leadership kind of, and it's just so good. You have to read it. I gave all of these books a 4 out of 5 stars. There is one character who I just absolutely despise, and Sabaa Tahir wrote that character like fantastically, but like that burning rage inside of me is like, no. The next fantasy book that I read was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book was so hard to read, and I ended up really loving it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but it is difficult to read. I don't blame you if you DNF this book, because honestly, I was so close to doing that, but then I was just like, you know what, you already started it, just finish it. And finished it, I did. It was an absolute roller coaster ride. I love the main character, Zachary. He's just so relatable. He goes through like this entire journey, and he like throughout the whole thing, he's like, I don't know what's happening, but you know what, we're still gonna go through it, and we love it. The romance in this book was absolutely heartbreaking, and I cried so much at the end of this. You have these characters who care so much about each other, and it's just the best thing ever. I will let you guys know that this book is like a story within a story within a story, and so it's a lot, and it's hard to really kind of keep up with everything because you are always switching different perspectives and like different stories like almost every chapter. But I highly recommend it, you know, if you're really into like fantasy. You know, the next fantasy book that I read was A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. I was really, really excited to read this book because the premise of it sounds so interesting. You have our main character, Malik, and he's lost his sister to like this spirit, and the only way for him to get her back is if he kills the princess. And there's like this whole competition that happens, and he enters in the competition to, you know, get close to her, because the princess is also our main protagonist, Karina, and her mother has died, and so she wants to resurrect her mother, and the only way to do that is to get a king's heart. And so she makes the winning prize of this competition her hand in marriage. And so, you know, it all like works together. Like they both get something in the end, or they both have like this end goal to get to. And honestly, just hearing that or like reading that synopsis, I was like, yes, I have to read this book. And finally I did. I kind of flew through this book. It usually takes me a while to read fantasy books, but I think I flew through this book like within 3 days, because for the Starless Sea, I started it in February, and it wasn't until like July where I picked it up again, and it took me like 2 weeks to finish it. So yeah, just kind of giving you like an idea of how long it takes me to read fantasy books. I give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it was just, you know, just great. I can't wait for the next book. I mean, it was a little bit lackluster because it is a young adult fantasy, and I feel like I'm starting to veer off from reading young adult fantasy books just because I feel like I don't really vibe with them anymore. But I still really love this one, and I am going to read the second book. Also, the cover for the next book, oh my god, it is gorgeous. The next fantasy book that I read was Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I picked up this book because someone had told me, you have to read this if you love the Studio Ghibli film, because the Studio Ghibli films, Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favorite movies ever, like top tier for me. And so I picked it up, and honestly, I gotta say, I still really like the movie better, but there are aspects of this book that I liked more than the movie, which was that we got to see more of Sophie and Howl's romance blossom and kind of see their relationship grow more. And in the movie, you don't really see that. It's more of these like short moments with them. And for me personally, I never really felt like a strong connection. And I also really like that there's more magic in the book and more work with his apprentice, Michael, he's named in the book, as opposed to in the movie where we don't really see Howl and Markle kind of having those like apprentice mentor kind of scenes. I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. So the next genre that we're going to go into is books written in verse. I would consider this a genre. I don't know if it's an actual genre, but yeah, it's only 2 books that I read that were in verse. And just to let you guys know, I am not the biggest fan of poetry, and so books written in verse don't really pull me towards them, but I was really pleasantly surprised by these two books. And these two books are Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds and Other Words for a Home by Jasmine Warga. These books are so emotional, and you just go through this experience with both characters and you feel their emotions so heavily. Granted, these two are very different books because Long Way Down follows our main character Will and him just going down this elevator, and it's like within the span of, I think it's like a minute or like 20 seconds. I don't really remember the time, but it's a short period of time. And so it's like you're going through like all like the emotions that he's feeling when coming down that elevator to get revenge for his brother. And then Other Words for a Home, you're following our main character Jude and her experience being an immigrant in America. These books are so different, but then like the way they're written in verse, it's so much more like impactful for me. I really love them, and honestly they have opened up the door for me to read more books written in verse. I ended up giving Long Way Down 5 out of 5 stars and Other Words for Home 4 out of 5 stars. The next category that we're gonna go into is mysteries and thrillers. The first book that I read within that genre was The Case for Jamie by Brittany Cavallaro. This is the third book in the Holmes series. I think that's what it's called. Maybe it's the Charlotte Holmes series. I put off reading this book for about a year because The Last of August, which was the book previous to this one, was just such a drag to go through. I just didn't feel connected with that story. I didn't really feel invested in their journey. Finally, this year, I was like, okay, we're gonna read The Case for Jamie, and I loved it. It was so refreshing, and like compared to The Last of August, I love this book so much. There are lines in this book that made me cry. And what I loved about this book was that our two main characters, Jamie and Charlotte, they went through some traumatic stuff in The Last of August, but then in this book, it's not really like, okay, so that happened, you know, we're okay now. The two characters do experience PTSD, and I'm glad that there is consistency within the series with that aspect. I do wish that there were more scenes with Jamie and Charlotte together towards the end, but I'm not mad about it. I loved it so much, especially when they came back together. Yes, it was just the most perfect thing ever, and I loved it. I ended up rating this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then the last book in the genre was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. I was planning on reading this earlier than I had read it because the Netflix movie was coming out, and I kind of look like the pattern of my dress kind of reminds me of that. Anyways, back onto the book. I'm kind of disappointed in myself because I did spoil myself for this book, so the ending wasn't really like a shock for me. And honestly, I wish I went into this book without knowing anything because that twist is something that's like really genius, I feel, and I don't know, I'm really sad. I'm really sad that that didn't really hit me. So I feel like me spoiling myself kind of made this book a little bit lackluster, you know. We just love that for me. So I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next genre we're gonna head into is young adult contemporary, and honestly I'm really surprised at how many young adult contemporary books I read because it wasn't a lot. Young adult contemporary usually is my jam, but I don't know what's like up with me this year. I do know what's up with me, and we're gonna talk about it later. But the first book that I read in this genre was My Heart and Other Black Holes by Jasmine Warga, and it was a reread for me. I had read it, I think, when I was 15, 14. I had mildly liked it when I was younger, and then I had like some weird urge to read it again, so I read it again, and I have to say I don't really like it anymore, not even mildly. I don't vibe with this book. This book does have characters who have depression and are suicidal, so trigger warnings for that, but I don't know how I feel about this book. I mean, I know I didn't really like it. I just felt like the main character, she was kind of like that I'm not like other girls trope, and it's just that is like one of my least favorite tropes. I did like the main character's voice in the beginning where she talked about her feelings a little bit more, and also her sarcasm and humor was something that I kind of liked. Also, I feel like this romance, this like relationship between our two main characters, I felt like if that one factor wasn't in there, they would not be a good match because all they did was argue. I think I ended up giving this like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. The other book that I read in this category was How to Make Friends with the Dark by Kathleen Glasgow. This was a really heavy book. I had to put this book down quite a few times because the emotions really got to me, and it was a lot, and this book was really good, and I feel like it's a great depiction of grief. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. This book follows our main character Tiger and her life after the death of her mother. It's basically about her grieving and trying to move forward from this event in her life. I cried basically the entire book. So yeah. And the last book that I read within this genre was The Way to Game the Walk of Shame by Jen P. Wynn. That title kind of like rolls off the tongue real easy. I like it. But this book, I have different thoughts on. Again, this was another reread for me. I had read it during the time when I had read My Heart and Other Black Holes, and so, you know, 14-year-old me or like 15-year-old me had different thoughts back then. I think I liked this book. Reading it now, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I also don't really hate it. There are some aspects of this book that I really like. I really liked that though there was miscommunication, there were characters who were like, you gotta communicate within like a relationship, you know, to make it work. And I love that. The main character does kind of feel like the I'm not like other girls trope. I read these when I was in middle school, so I didn't know what high school was like. And so after I've graduated high school and reading these again, I'm like, that doesn't really seem realistic. But then again, everyone's high school experience does differ from each other. And so maybe this is like really relatable to like some other people who have had the same experience as these characters. I didn't entirely hate it. I also didn't entirely love it. So it's like right in the middle. I think I gave this like a 3 out of 5 stars. I did like the fake dating trope. You know, fake dating tropes, one of my favorite tropes now. I thought it was well executed in this one. The last genre that we're going to talk about is one where I have a lot of books to talk about, and this genre is the adult romance genre. So just to kind of paint a picture of who I am as a reader, I'm not one who particularly reaches out to reading romance books. I do love romance, but it's just not something I've been so interested in, like romance-based books. But I decided to delve into the genre because of the first book on this list, which is Get a Life of Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I read this book and it was amazing, and it set me on this track of just reading romance books. And you know what? I thank it. So if you're looking for a book to kind of help you go into the adult romance genre, read Get a Life of Chloe Brown, because this was just amazing. I loved the two main characters, Chloe and Red. They're just such gems. The smut scenes in this one were great. I'm just gonna say that. The next book that I read within this genre was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, and I was aware of this book like last year or a couple years ago because I think it won like the Goodreads Choice Romance Genre Award, and so I was aware of it, but I didn't pick it up. But after Get a Life Chloe Brown, it was the other romance book that I knew of, so I picked it up, and it was also equally as great. But I did rate Get a Life Chloe Brown 5 out of 5 stars, and I rated this one 4 out of 5 stars. Just because I feel like the ending was a little bit lackluster for me, but you know, that's just me. The wholesomeness within this book, the ease that this book was just fantastic. I really liked that this book was really, you know, easygoing. There's not huge arguments or like things like that that happened in this book, and so I really like that. This has the fake dating trope, and lo and behold, it was another favorite. Loved it, you know. I just, yeah. This book was just great. The next book I read was The Bride Test by Helen Huang, and this one was not a favorite of mine. I gave this a 2.5 out of 5 stars. The pacing wasn't one of my favorite things, and the romance between our two main characters was a little bit lackluster, but our two main characters, like individually, are really, really strong and great characters. And so I don't understand how you can have this dynamic but then lack in those certain areas. I really love these characters. These characters are very memorable, but then their relationship was subpar. The ending was entirely messy. I felt like the author had way too many loose ends to tie up, and right at the last moment she was like, here we go, we're tying every knot. The next book I read was Open House by Ruby Lang, and all I'm gonna say about this one is that it was really boring, but that's just like my personal opinion. I know there's people out there who really like this book, and honestly I think it was just me. I didn't really vibe with this book. I didn't really feel a connection between the two main characters. I also feel like it was because this book was really short, where I didn't really feel the connection between the two, and also I felt like the pacing was a little bit off. The next book that I read was Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. I really, really like this book. I love the banter between Josh and Hazel. I thought their relationship from like friends to lovers was really, really nice. And I also really, really love the dialogue. The dialogue I found is one of my favorite things within Christina Lauren's books. It's very realistic, flows very easily, and I liked it. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was another Christina Lauren book, and that was The Unhoneymooners, and this one was not a favorite of mine. So what I did like about this book was, again, the dialogue. I really loved it. I love the banter between our two main characters, and I liked that because this book is a hate to love or enemies to lovers trope kind of thing. I liked that the hating or enemies portion was dragged out. I feel like with a lot of enemies to lovers trope books, it's like a chapter of them being enemies and then like they're lovers for the rest of the book. So I really like that about this one. I thought the ending was pretty cringy, and like I'm all here for unrealistic cheesy shit, but it was just cringy. The next book that I read was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne, and you know what? I'm really interested in watching the major motion picture because there's like a little sticker on it that says that, and the only reason why I'm interested is because there are some certain scenes and the way the characters act that I feel are really cringy and cheesy and not okay. I'm wondering how they're gonna like adapt that to screen, so I'm really looking forward to the changes and like what they kept the same. But I kind of like this book. I give this a 3 out of 5 stars. I love the flirting scenes, really great. My real gripe with this book is that there was a heavy emphasis on the size of both characters. The main girl was always like, you know, like I'm so like short and like dainty and petite, and like the guy is like really tall and masculine. It was like something that kept being repeated, and I was like, do we need to keep repeating this? I don't understand the significance. And also, I didn't really like the jealousy that they portrayed. You know, it's okay to be jealous, but then I felt like it was like assumptions for like this character. Like there's this one scene where the girl thinks that the hostess of the hotel that they're staying at is like oogling her boyfriend or the main dude. And I was like, this is just like those scenarios where you're a waitress and you're serving this couple and then the girl's like, he's taken. And it's like, I was just doing my job, honey. Also, kind of going back on Christina Lauren's book, I really felt unsettled with the low-key like slut shaming that was happening. I mean, I don't know. It wasn't in your face slut shaming, but then there were certain lines that felt borderline slut shaming. The next book that I read was The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. This one I had like mixed feelings about. The thing with these romance books is that I read them like in one night, and so I can read them really fast. So yeah, the beginning was a little bit hard to kind of go into, and it was a little bit lackluster, kind of boring, but the ending was one of my favorites. It was just very easygoing and it felt really realistic. You know, there wasn't this huge argument. It was more communicative discussions and like talks. And so I really, really like that. I felt like once the two main characters slept together, that's where the romance really sparked. Because before that, I didn't really feel a strong connection. I think I gave this like a 3 out of 5 stars or like a 2.5. Yeah. The next book that I read was You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hoggle, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely love this book so much. It is one of like the only romance books to make me tear up, and it was just great. I loved it. I love the lovers to enemies lovers trope. It was really funny and really heartwarming, also really heartbreaking. I just love seeing these two characters finally communicate. And because there were miscommunications before in their relationship, but then the events that happened in this book is just them communicating and really learning to be each other's friend again. It was beautiful. I loved it so, so much. It's such a romantic book and I love it. The last book in this whole wrap-up and in this genre is Take a Hit, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. The only thing that I didn't really vibe with was the social media aspect of it, just because it's not my favorite thing to read in books. I feel like it's a little bit cringy, so I did feel that way with this book. But otherwise, I thought that the two main characters were great. You have these two characters who have their individual growth and they have lives outside of their relationship, and I loved it so much, and their relationship was so cute and I love it. And like, it's the fake dating trope, you know. It was perfect. The flirting scenes were so great. The smut scenes, fantastic. Like, Talia Hibbert can write smut scenes and I live for it. So that is it for this long-winded wrap-up of, I think, like 7 months. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and let me know your thoughts down below in the comments about the books that I talked about, and I will see you guys in my next video. Goodbye.